Hi, Lisa.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Welcome to Ideology Podcast.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
So, the reason why I wanted to talk to you, I'll let you introduce yourself, but the reason I wanted to talk to you specifically is because you seem to have an unusual holistic approach to divorce that I wouldn't expect in a divorce lawyer. I read that, you have an inclusive approach where you talk to mental health professionals and financial advisors and career counselors and real estate advisors so that divorce is a holistic endeavor for the family. And this isn't the image that we conjure up in our head when we think of divorce lawyers.
So I do take a very holistic view of it because we actually need all the pieces in order to build our case for someone, and either to be able to come to the negotiation table with important information that will help us settle a case in a client's favor, or obviously to litigate if we need to. So you're right. I mean, we work with therapists. We work with forensic psychologists are often on a case, and of course those are appointed by the court, and we can't have dialogue with them. But certainly therapists we work with, and we work with real estate advisors. Financial advisors are very important because they help our client plan for their future based upon certain desires that they may have, as well as the actual sums of money that they're going to receive, as well as what their support may be or what support they have to pay for that matter. So it's really important to do that. And then we also work with career counselors and vocational analysts as well, because many of our clients are not necessarily working, or if we represent the working spouse, that particular client would be to their advantage to have the other spouse actually be contributing as well in terms of, the child support, in terms of being able to support themselves. And so it's important to get an idea in the market, what is that potential for being able to earn, and someone who can actually speak to that by interviewing a client, by looking at market data, and then by giving us an analysis of what somebody could earn. And then, of course, we have those clients who really do need career counselors. And those career counselors are very important because they are the people on the ground who are able to say to us and to the client, these are the jobs that are available. Let me help you do that. Let me help you get started. Maybe it's even volunteer work to get started for certain people because they've been out of the workforce for so long. So we work with all of those people, and it's important to be able to reach out to them to ask for advice, and it's important for them to actually be working with us on a particular matter.
That's really interesting to know. I so I'll let you briefly introduce yourself, just so that the viewers can get a bit of a background.
Sure. So I have a very large matrimonial and family law practice in both Manhattan and in Westchester, although we work with many clients in other areas, including Kings County and Rockland County, Dutchess County, Putnam County. And we have been in business for about 10 years. It'll be 10 years in November. Actually, we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary. We are over 20 lawyers. My background specifically, I was in the fashion business for many years, and then decided, as I went through my own divorce, that I wanted to return to school, and so went to college, got my BA, and then went on to law school to become an attorney focused on family law and matrimonial law, and as a result, my practice has grown. I think, part of it is that I had life experience before going to law school. And so I understood what it was like to be at the negotiation table in the fashion business, which is frankly a very difficult business where you're negotiating markdown money and you're negotiating space in retail stores and all of those types of things. And so, I was very involved in all of that and took a lot of those skills, I think, to the negotiation table to be able to negotiate for people and advocate for them. So that's really my background. And we have an incredible team of attorneys who have come from various different, walks of life as well. And we were able to put together this team and we work really well together. And the client, I think, benefits from that team approach.
Right. At what age were you? We have mostly women 30 plus on this channel. Hopefully everyone will benefit from it though.
So I was actually over 30 when I decided to go back to school, and I graduated law school at 42. Wow. So, it's definitely a second career for me. And I have a child. I wouldn't call her a child anymore. She's 31 years old. And so
how old was she when you went back?
When I went back, she was approximately, I guess, 5 or 6 years old. Wow. And so, yeah. So, I've done a lot of the things that my clients actually are doing as well, right? Starting new careers, starting essentially new lives, doing all of that. And I think it's important that they see that people can do it too.
That's really interesting, actually. I have to say, I had a completely different set of questions for you, but now I'm thinking a lot of women will benefit from even really hearing your story, because I know so many women who, I'm 46, and so they're in their 40s or late 30s, and maybe they're just now going through a divorce and they feel really stuck, especially if you've never had a career and maybe got married young, and then now you've hit midlife. Your partner, in some cases, some people I know, the partner, it's an identity crisis. Their partner is now moving on to someone else, setting up a whole new family or abandoning this family, and all the things that I thought were of my mom and my grandmom's generation, I'm now seeing in our lives unfold. So can we talk a little bit about that, what that was like?
Sure. So look, for me, it was just a very natural progression, frankly. I had been through my divorce, and as I was going through my divorce, I became very interested in the law. And so I really wanted to do this. I think that for many women that I see, and I'm part of an organization, actually I'm VP of an organization called Savvy Ladies. I don't know if you're aware of that organization or not, but it is a organization, non-for-profit, actually a 501c3, whereby women are actually able to call into a helpline and get free financial advice. They are paired with financial professionals, and a lot of their issues center around sometimes divorce or widowhood or other life events that have happened to them, or they of course are saving for their retirement or making a career move or any of those things. And so I think for women, they have to remember that life is a long path, right? And that it's not unusual to change your career at least once, maybe 2 times. And that if there's an interest and a passion that you have, that you should be following that interest and passion. I think for many women, it's very difficult for them because they come out of the workforce, or they graduate, from college, and then they get married, and they may decide that they're not going to pursue their careers. Instead, they're going to support a spouse's career or support their children. And when I say support, I mean, be there for them, right? And so as a result, they sacrifice their own career. I didn't really do that. I was out in the workforce in the fashion business, and then I went straight into getting my BA. And then when I was in law school, I was also working. I always felt that it was really important to be able to raise a child and to be out in the workforce. That was definitely something that I felt was very important. And so I was always out there. And I think that it's important that women realize and people.
You said that you think it's important that women have a career and don't really take a career break. Why is that?
I do think that. And the reason I think that is because you can't make up the time that you're out of the workforce, right? That element of time, that explanation that you need to give later when you return to the workforce, it's a very difficult explanation. And, people move up a ladder, right?
Yes.
Generally. And so when you're out of the workforce for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it's going to be very difficult for you to recoup that time that you're out of the workforce. It's almost not possible.
Right.
So I think it's really important that they keep a hand in the workforce. I understand many of them will want to stay home and be with their children or support their family. But I think if they're going to do that they need to have a plan for the other side of this when they come out. And that's why we recommend so many times that women enter into prenups or postnuptial agreements prior to having their children, or when they're having their children, or after they are having their children even, right? Certainly before they get married, so that they can plan for their future, because they are going to be essentially behind if they aren't in the workforce and making a plan for themselves. And it's a good place to do it in a prenup or a postnup, to start to think about what is going to be at the end of the road if the road comes to an end, right? If your marriage terminates for some reason, what is the plan for you? Because I will say it's very difficult sometimes on the other end to get that support, that spousal support, that alimony, which are one and the same. It's very difficult sometimes to be able to keep your lifestyle.
But don't you find, actually, I don't know, I was going to ask you, do you think that a prenup is a harbinger for the end of your fairy tale marriage?
No, I don't. I actually think that it is a good plan. I am become more and more convinced as the years have gone on that having that prenup is so important. It's not a harbinger. It is a realistic look at what your life is going to be. It's a roadmap, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't mean that you're going to get divorced because you've entered into a prenup. I think the statistics actually show quite the opposite, actually. But I think that it is a time to have a discussion and to be very transparent about what your goals are, what your spouse's goals are. So for example, if your spouse says, I really want you to stay home and raise children and not be in the workforce, and I need you to support me, and I want you to be able to travel with me and do all of those things, right? Or vice versa. Your spouse says, I want to be a stay-at-home parent, okay? Mm-hmm. And I want to be able to do that. And you're either okay with it or you're not okay with it. It's a time to have all of those discussions and to have them honestly and to have them about economics, because it is going to have an economic effect.
But what about people who sort of come into it and think, okay, we both have a joint account, and the wife is in charge of the account, and so she can plan the finances for the family however she sees fit, and so there's no need for that. And doesn't it take away distrust? Doesn't it indicate to your partner that actually I'm kind of preparing for the worst case scenario here?
No, I definitely do not agree. And here's the reason. Number one, nobody, without a prenup, you don't know if you're just going to have a joint account. You may have many accounts, and one of the spouse may decide that they're going to put all of their money, all of their income into their own account. Now, that doesn't mean in New York that, for example, that's their money. But it does mean that that the spouse who you're talking about, right, who would be planning, has very little to plan with, because the majority of the money may be in an account titled solely in another person's name. And so there's nothing to plan there, right? They no longer have control. Secondly, it's not just about the asset. In other words, it's not just about the income that has been earned, right? It's about what is the future. So now you're married for 20 years and you've split up all the accounts, and that's great. Okay. But unfortunately, there's not enough money to carry you through to your 90s. Okay, which you may well live into your 90s. And the question becomes, how are you going to support yourself? And what you could have done in a prenup or in a postnuptial agreement is actually plan for that. You can say, if we're married for 10 years, I'm going to get X, or I'm going to get alimony for X, or spousal support for X amount of years and X amount of money, or a portion of your income, a third of your income, a half of your income, whatever it's going to be. If you don't have that document, then you're leaving it to chance, essentially. And so, no, I actually think that for the spouse who has less, it's more important to have that prenup.
What about people who are now getting divorced and they didn't have that counsel? And I know women now who find themselves in this situation. They didn't have a prenup, but the spouse has, it's done well, but is now saying, I don't really want to share any of it.
Well, so share any of it, meaning they don't want to split up the assets. That's probably not going to be an option after a long marriage. Okay, so that's unless both spouses were not contributing to any portion of the marriage, meaning work, raising children, taking care of the home, all of those things. It's unlikely, okay, that there will be no sharing. Okay. But it's not just about the sharing of the assets, because it's also about how they're going to support themselves going forward. Because they are going to need a portion of those assets to live later when they can no longer work. They do not want to be in a situation where they're now in their 40s or 50s or 60s. Okay. And we see that a lot in gray divorce, what we call gray divorce, where, often people are left in a situation where they're perhaps, older and more difficult to get back into the workforce. And they are now using all of their assets to support themselves. And by the way, there may not be that much in assets, or there may be a lot in assets, but either way, they likely had a lifestyle that they really want to still engage in. Yeah. And so it's difficult.
Yeah. No, I know a lot of people who didn't have a prenuptial and are exactly in that situation where the spouse doesn't think they need to pay them any alimony. And as you say, they've hired a lawyer and they're trying to work out what their assets are, what their splits are. But like you say, if you haven't worked for that long, you are in a situation where what do you do now for the rest of your life? But you give us hope. You think that some women can go back and retrain and follow their passion and have a thriving career.
I do. I definitely do think that. I think that women are able to do that. I think people are able to do that. They have to be retrained, and they have to be very diligent about it, and they have to be passionate about it, and they have to, want to take that step to do that. 40 plus, they can definitely do it. Okay, they can do it. There's no reason, right? I think it's women who get into their late 50s and 60s that are really at the problem age. I think that it's very much appreciated in your 40s when you are retrained and you're very diligent, and maybe your children are older and you can easily go back into the workforce and contribute to the workforce and contribute to your career. I think that that's something that's doable. I think it is very much less doable when you are 58, 59, 62. I think that's a time period when it becomes a problem.
Right. You also have some advice about divorcing a narcissist. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience about these types of divorce cases?
Sure. So look, I think that people come to me very often and they say that I am, I'm married to a narcissist. Now, whether that is indeed the case I'm not quite sure, because we're not doing a deep, we're not therapists, right? And we're not psychologists or psychiatrists. They may also just have narcissistic qualities, traits, but they may not be actually classified as narcissist. That being said, your experience of this person is not necessarily going to be my experience of this person, right? And because you found this person to be charming and therefore, we're overwhelmed in some way by that charm, and you see that other people are overwhelmed by that charm, you have to understand that I'm here to advocate for you, and I'm not going to be taken in by this charm. So I think that that's also very important to realize. So I think that there's a variety of things about this that are important. And I think that, you have to trust in your lawyer to be an advocate for you, and to go from there.
What are qualities that make a good divorce lawyer?
So I would say your divorce lawyer has to obviously understand the law. And in addition to understanding the law, they need to be a good advocate. You need to feel confident that they are, able to advocate for what is not only what you want, but what is practical and what is reasonable. Because I think that you're not hiring somebody to just agree with you. Okay. And I think that people, need to understand that. You may have all sorts of views about what would be, your wish list, essentially. But this isn't about a wish list, right? This is really about what is practical under the circumstances. And when I say practical, what is going to be reasonable under the law? And then for someone to advocate for that. I think also, so honesty, having a lawyer who is very straightforward is very important, because they're going to have to tell you when your ideas are realistic and when they're unrealistic, when this is something to stay in the fight for, or when it's something to let it go. I also think you need somebody who is prepared, somebody who can work as a team player, somebody who can work with you, somebody who has your back. As I said, somebody who's very familiar with the law, somebody who's good at the negotiation table, and who can also hold their own in court.
Right. So in talking to many people who've witnessed or been through really tough divorces, I have the feeling people think that actually the divorce lawyers are at the root of why things get so complex. What are things that you should avoid in a divorce lawyer?
I would say, so what would I say? Avoid people who are not truthful. Okay. Your divorce lawyer should be being truthful. I would avoid someone who is who you feel is just agreeing with you to take your case. Right. I think that's probably the most important person to avoid. I think that many people come to my office and we have a consultation and I tell them the truth, and they may go on to another attorney, and that's fine. And then sometimes they come back to me because it didn't work out the way the other attorney who wanted the case so badly told them it was going to work out. And now they've understood that what I've told them was the realistic, outcome. And so now they're in that situation. I also think that you need to avoid an attorney who is who you just don't get along with. Right. I think that's key that you get along with your divorce attorney, right? And that doesn't mean you always agree. Many of my clients would say we have, very a lot of conversations, and we don't always agree on the things, and we talk it out. And sometimes I will see a different side of it by speaking about it, or I'll think of something different by speaking about it with them. But many times they understand that I understand the law and that this is really what's going to happen. Right.
And is it in the lawyer's interest to settle the case quickly, or to let it drag on and on and on and charge hourly fees and all of that?
So I don't think that settling the case quickly is necessarily the goal, frankly. I think that sometimes things have to play out. And I think people who want to settle their case quickly often don't end up getting what they should get in terms of financial assets, because things could get overlooked, or they haven't done their due diligence, or you haven't allowed your attorney to do the due diligence, or custody didn't really have a chance to play out because you were, not a divorced or going through a divorce for a very long time. And so you don't really know what your children, how your children are going to react, and how all of that is going to play out. I don't think speed is necessarily the goal. I think speed is a goal, but it's not the goal, right? I think that marriages take a long time to unwind. And I think people have to understand that. Also, they have to understand that sometimes one spouse is ahead of the game in terms of they wanted the divorce. And so they were more prepared for it than the other spouse. And it may take time for somebody to catch up.
Right. Well, we hadn't thought of that, actually. So in terms of, every day this term people use, consciously uncoupling, do you think it's possible to consciously uncouple, or that's...
I haven't heard that term. What does that term mean?
So it's, I think, a term that Gwyneth Paltrow, it's like a celebrity term. We're going to try and uncouple consciously and avoid all the toxicity that comes with divorcing, right? But I personally, you can reduce conflict as much as possible, but it's in the very nature of divorcing that there will be a lot of conflict. Or is there a way to do it well and healthy?
I think it depends on the situation. I think it absolutely depends on the situation. I don't think that every couple is going to be able to do it as amicably and leaving out the toxic pieces of it, because I think that every situation is different and there are complexities, and life is complex and people are complex.
Right. What do you find are things that really have surprised you about being a divorce lawyer?
Things that have surprised me. I'm sort of out of surprises at this point.
Really?
You see it all. I'm kind of out of surprises. I will say that. I would say that we see so much. We see addiction. We see addiction in so many forms: gambling addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addictions, mental health issues, of all sorts, custodial issues, children being placed in the middle, assets being hidden, millions and millions of dollars of assets being hidden that we have to find. I think that we see so much, nothing really seems to surprise me anymore.
Right. That's a good way to think. That's the divorce lawyer I would want, someone who's pretty much seen it all and nothing surprises them. And so what would you say to somebody who is in that situation where they've realized, actually, I do want the best for my kids. I do want, to figure out a way to uncouple properly, but they also are in a situation where they realize the other partner isn't going to play fair.
I think they need a good divorce attorney at that point, right? They need a very good divorce attorney, because I don't know that if somebody's going to play fairly. I think that's why you need to hire a good divorce attorney from the beginning, because people may intend to play fairly, but their version of fair may be different than your version of fair.
Right. And so the job of the divorce lawyer is to really reveal everything that the other person has.
As much as you can, yes, as much as you can. I mean, look, there are certain situations where you're not going to find everything, but certainly there needs to be proper discovery. There may need to be a forensic accountant that we work with. There's, all of those pieces, right? There may be businesses that have to be valued. There may be real property that has to be valued. There's a whole host of things that need to happen in a divorce. Net worth statements for sure need to be exchanged. A good agreement has to be written when you get to the point of a settlement agreement. We have seen where people literally have not turned over discovery, and we've had to subpoena the discovery. We have also seen where people turned over pieces of the discovery, and had we not dug further, we would have not understood the totality of the assets and what the assets are about. Sometimes it's not just the values. You have to understand the assets themselves and what those assets can produce in terms of income.
Right. I have a situation now where the wife had no idea. She didn't see it coming. And she's completely in a daze and doesn't think she has any rights. And so I find a lot of people go through almost a year of just being trapped in the headlights, and not taking any action because they're just stunned. They didn't see it coming.
But that was my point earlier. Right. So that was my point earlier, is that it takes a while for somebody else to catch up. Right. That woman had to catch up.
Have you found that there are situations where somebody presented as being a lot wealthier, the Bernie Madoff types, and then with the naive wife who thinks that she has assets and finance and a plan to fall back on, and then nothing? You're actually also legally viable, or you're legally responsible. Yeah.
So, we do see that, but when there's no assets, there's no assets. That's the problem, right? We certainly see that from time to time. It's less frequent than, finding the assets, but there are times when people have lived a very high lifestyle, and then they discover that there is very high credit card debt. Yes. And there are no assets, and where they thought that there were a lot of assets and they weren't worried about living this high lifestyle, then they are faced with hundreds of thousands of dollars of credit card debt, and they are very shocked because they thought that the other person was, running the show essentially, and that there was plenty of money, and they had never been told that things were as bad as they were. So sure, we see that. And those are very difficult cases because A, there's not assets to split. Obviously, there's debt to split. And B, the question is, who's going to be responsible for all of that debt? And then, of course, you have the issue that now, you're going to be changing your lifestyle. And that is a lot of information to take in as you're going through the divorce.
Yeah. And sometimes there's even like criminal charges, right? I think I've been watching this on some of the reality shows where, you now have to prove that you were an innocent party. Yeah.
You're talking about in terms of tax issues, and sometimes there are tax issues, and you may end up actually, trying to prove that you were an innocent spouse in some way because somebody took, improper deductions or didn't pay taxes that they were supposed to pay, and you were not knowledgeable about it. And so those are the types of cases that we refer to accountants.
You'd refer to your accountants. What would you then do? Because now you might not be able to represent a client who is only got debt that can't afford to even hire you.
Well, that person ends up having to settle their case, because obviously it's not just about what they could afford for me. It's the fact that that case needs to get settled, because it's not going to get any better. This would not be a case like fine wine, which is going to age and become better. That debt will just grow. And, we might refer out to a bankruptcy attorney. We might refer out to tax attorneys. Those people have some real issues.
What are things that you think lead to this complete breakdown of the fairy tale so that almost people end up at your door?
There's so many things.
Yeah.
I think that people grow apart and change over time. I think that, you may have stressors in your marriage that are just insurmountable. People are human beings, and those stressors take a toll. There may be economic stresses, there may be health stresses, there may be stressors in terms of your children. I think that sometimes people find other people that they would prefer to be with.
Yeah.
That's a stressor, and certainly it's a reality as well. Life is longer now, and so marriage is longer, or has the potential to be longer, and maybe for some people that's too long to be together.
Yeah.
I think that because there are many times two people out in the workforce, they can actually afford to divorce. And they also have the ability to be out there and to be working and to be meeting people and to be hearing other people's stories and narratives. I think people may feel that life is too short, and that if this is not working, then they need to get out. I think that divorce has become much more common, and it does not have the taboo that it used to have. And so people are more readily, I think, readily agreeable to divorce in some ways, or thinking of divorce. Their friends may have gotten divorced. Their children's friends may have gotten, their parents may have gotten divorced. And so, I think that there's a lot of different reasons.
Right.
I think there's also a lot of information about divorce out there now, podcasts and articles, and a lot of information, so that people are thinking of that as an option in their lives.
What do you find, though, for children? Isn't it still ideal to have both parents living together?
I don't believe that. And I think that I think there's a view towards that. It's not my view. I think that lots of times children do far better when their parents are not living together, because they are not in the middle of this chaotic, stressful, angry, situation that goes on in a household. And when everybody is separated out, and they can have time with each of their parents, that is not, nobody's screaming, nobody's yelling. There's not, all of the tension and the stress. I think that that's far better for a child. And, I've seen children who often come to me, because I'm an attorney for children sometimes also, and they're not surprised that their parents are getting divorced, because their parents have been arguing, and it was so uncomfortable for them, and so much nicer now that they're not living together. And so, no, I don't believe that, actually.
So it's mostly, then, you would say, children who, are growing up in a harmonious household and all of that. And obviously, those are not the people who come to you.
I think that's true, right? Okay, so they may be in a household where very few people, there may be no angry words, but there may also be no love, frankly. There may be no compassion. There may, people may just go their own different ways. I don't know that that's also a healthy atmosphere, but I think everybody has to make their own decisions for their own children, what they think that they're, what they want to do. But I personally, I don't think that that's the way to live.
So if a woman is coming to you now, and obviously she's in that stage where she has maybe young children, and she's thinking, I personally cannot live or survive in this marriage, but I do think, he's my children's father. I think he's a sweet dad, and she's torn. What would you then say? Do you send her to a therapist, or do you give her time to come to a decision about whether she wants to end it? What's the next step for you?
Well, the next step for us, look, when we have that person in our office, we tell them what it's going to look like in terms of asset splits, in terms of custodial time, in terms of what custody may look like, in terms of what support may look like. And then, yes, many times we do advise that they see a therapist and they talk it out, and then they come back if they have questions or if they want to proceed further. We're not the people who, are the people who essentially pull the plug on the marriage. We're the people who are there when you want to get divorced, right? When you've made your decision. We're not there to convince people to divorce. We're not there to convince them to stay married either, frankly. We are there to give them information about what will occur when and if they get divorced.
Right. That's very clear. In a WSJ article, you were talking about succession, and you said that people should see marriage as a financial partnership, especially if it's not their first marriage. Now, I've been married very briefly, and so I still live in fairy tale land. And reading that, it just made me think, oh no, I don't want to see it that way. Why do you think that?
I think that because that's really, first of all, in New York, that's really the law. Marriage is a financial partnership. People should not be mistaken about it. There is a partnership that you are forming, and and when you're married, there is a law, right, that you are part of now. And there is a obligation that is now forming between the two of you. Because you've decided to get married. If you didn't get married, you wouldn't have many of these obligations. So there wouldn't be a question of whether you're going to get spousal support, because, for example, in New York, there would be no spousal support if you don't get married. There would be no equitable distribution if you're not married. You may have children together, and so there would be child support and custodial rights if you have a child and not married. But there is no question that marriage is a financial partnership. You are getting married to someone, and now you have rights and you have obligations, and you can have all the other pieces of it, but there are going to be obligations. And when you are ready to get divorced, if that's what ends up happening, right, there will also be obligations that you have, and that's not a choice.
Right. Because can we talk about the obligations?
Sure. I mean, there are going to be obligations to divide accounts. There are going to be obligations to divide assets. There are going to be obligations perhaps to pay spousal support. There may be obligations if your spouse is unhealthy at some point, to deal with making sure that financially that person is taken care of. The question of how long and how much, that's going to be the question, because unless you have a prenup or a postnuptial agreement, that will not be set in stone. But there are obligations when you get married, and that is no longer just two people in love, right?
But don't you think this is why then a lot of people are opting out of marriage? Because I've been watching this trend of younger people who say, yeah, we're not, marriage isn't, it's not attractive. And I was trying to figure out where that came from, because we grew up, just watching endless romantic movies, and everything was romantic. The songs, everything was romantic. What's changed in just one generation that people now, it must be that, right?
Well, I don't know if it's changed in one generation, but I will say that I think that more and more, households have dual incomes. That's changed, right? And I think that women have much more of a voice than they did many, many years ago. That's changed, right? And I think that I think generally that, as I said, I think people are living longer and want to be happy. I think people want to be happy. And so I think that that's also important. And I think that I'm not sure that people are so much opting out. I mean, we see a lot of people come to us for prenups. Many, many, many people. I will tell you, we had our busiest year in prenups probably ever. And the reason being that, to your point, they do understand that it's a financial partnership. They have seen either their parents or friends get divorced. They understand that it's not all, that there is a financial partnership and that they have to be mindful of it. And so they want it to be set forth in documents and as a contract, so that they understand what their rights and their obligations are.
And what are the things that people are putting in a prenup? Are they saying, I don't want to look after you? What is it?
No, I think that for the most part, they are figuring out, well, what's going to what's going to be mine and what's going to be yours in the event that we get divorced? How do I keep my inheritance separate? How do I keep premarital assets that I had prior to the marriage separate? How do I either what is my obligation going to be in terms of spousal support, if any? And what are my estate rights going to be? Am I leaving all of my, my premarital property, my inheritances to my spouse, or am I going to be able to do this by will? In New York, we have something called an elective share, where if you didn't have a will, and you didn't have a prenup, a third of your estate would go to the other person, meaning your spouse. Am I going to waive out of my elective share? Tax issues. Are we going to file jointly? Are we going to file separately? What's going to happen to my business that I have now when I'm entering into the marriage? Am I going to have to value that business later? What's going to happen to the appreciation of my premarital assets? What's going to happen to the money that was my family legacy money, essentially, right?
Yeah.
My family worked hard for that money. I want to make sure that we keep that separate. All of these things, family businesses, there are so many parts to what can go into a prenup.
And but don't you think that's precisely the thing, though? If I met a partner, or let's say I happen to win the lottery now, or whatever, I've inherited some money. If I'm going to marry somebody with these types of conditions, why would they marry me? Because I'm already saying, look, I want to keep what's mine. And so if I'm not willing to share something, then, or share, what I have, really, why are we together?
Well, but the law doesn't provide that we share everything either.
Right.
Okay. And the law doesn't provide that your inheritance goes to the other person as long as you keep your inheritance separate. And the law doesn't provide that your premarital property goes to the other person as long as you can identify, trace it, separate it, right? And this is New York law that I'm talking about, so we're clear. But yeah, I think that the reason that you get married is to build a life together. But, that doesn't mean that you are willing to enter into a marriage to have the obligations on the other side, or to lose your separate property, or to lose all of the money that your family worked so hard for generations. Yes. And so, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to share anything, although it might mean that, we keep our financial lives separate, to your point, right? That was your point earlier in some ways, right? But the point is to have the discussion so that everybody knows going in, so that you, for example, if you feel that the way that you do, that everything should be shared, that you are having that discussion. So everybody can be on the same page up front and talk it out and understand it. And then if you understand that everything is not going to be shared, that person who came into the marriage with many millions of dollars is not going to be sharing that many millions of dollars, right? And that I may still have to work. Okay, I may still have to go out there and work, and that means that I'm not going to stay home. And even though you can stay home because you have your many millions of dollars, that doesn't mean that I can stay home. And I need to make sure that I am earning and I'm out there and that I'm vital in the workforce. And so I think that it doesn't mean that marriage is not an option. It just means that marriage is now, you're having these discussions, these very important discussions. And
it's so complicated in just one or two generations, right?
I don't think it's so complicated. I think that these are discussions, it's interesting. So my husband and I were in a Wall Street Journal article, which came out actually in the Wall Street Journal about how we deal with our finances. And it was very easy for us to have the discussion because we discuss finances every day.
Right.
Every day.
Right.
It's just part of our normal conversation. We're not sitting down and having, a night where we're discussing our finances. It's every day. We discuss our investments. We discuss our finances. We discuss all of those things. We've always been very transparent about our finances. There are some marriages where that does not happen. And so it's very important that people understand what the differences are and who they're marrying and what their their desires are, and so that everybody can actually work together and be transparent.
Right.
And it's the transparency that's so important. And so, no, I think these discussions are so important. And I don't think they're complicated discussions. I think that they're honest discussions.
Right. I really love the framing of that, because I think it takes away, because for most people, I think the subject is so ridden with guilt, shame, and so many other emotions that it's buried until something awful happens, until the worst has happened. And then now you're realizing, actually, this is who really my husband is. He's decided that after 20, 25 years of having children with him, I deserve absolutely nothing, even though I was looking after the house.
So, and that happens, right? So it's better to have the discussion early on.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Really a pleasure.
I think this will help a lot of people to think differently.
No, and I think, look, I think that these were interesting and complex questions that you have asked, and I think that it was a very interesting discussion.
Thanks, Lisa. Speak soon. Bye.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.